Welcome back, everyone. We are live from Macon, Georgia today. We have had to escape the hurricane in Florida and head north to be able to hit the airports up in Atlanta. So it's been a bit of a frantic weekend rearranging things, but we're excited to be here today as we meet with Frederick Lawrence, who is the Secretary and CEO of Phi Beta Kappa. And this organization oversees universities across the country and is look at the honors programs there, works with leaders looking at free speech and human rights in a variety of different key areas. So we are so excited to have Dr. Lawrence with us today. I will tell you that, just as an aside before we get started, we want to make sure we give a shout out to everyone in the Bahamas right now. We recognize those of us in Florida that have lived through these hurricanes and certainly up the East Coast that this is a really tremendous situation for all of them, and we want to make sure that we send them some love and some support. So at this point, we're just going to go ahead and wait for our guest to join us and dive into today's discussion focused really on education, well, really the convergence of education, free speech, and human rights. This has been a topic that, really kind of gets at the heart of Americans in many cases, but I think today is even more pronounced as we are in a very toxic situation. Certainly free speech is something to be protected entirely, and at the same time, I almost feel like we've lost a little bit of respect for that privilege, and that's one of the questions that we have today is, where is that line? Where is it that we are entitled to say whatever it is that we please, and also obligated to ensure that what we're saying is accurate, respectful, reasonable, and beneficial to our world and to others? And when is it we are just crossing the line and causing problems? When it comes to laws, one of the lines that we really look at, of course, is safety. And the question sometimes becomes, when do our words cross the safety line? Certainly, we often hear the line, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never hurt me. But that is not the case anymore. Dr. Lawrence, just a minute. We went ahead and there we go. We're going to go ahead and add you in. And so we're adding and just connecting here in a minute. Welcome, sir. I'm so glad
JJ,
to see you today.
how are
Very well.
you?
I'm pleased we were able to make it today amidst the chaos of the hurricane preparation.
Yeah, well, I hope everybody listening and you and yours are safe and sound and remain safe throughout
I
all
think
this.
we will. We've had two major damages to our home in Orlando, and actually just finished the final fixes a week before I left on my big trip. So we are, this is new to us,
Oh my,
but really, as before you came on, I said our hearts are really out to those in the Bahamas. That
you bet,
that is just
you bet.
too much for them, and I'm eager to find out what the results are of that damage, because it's going to be a major overhaul.
That is correct. And of course, we heard about some fatalities from it. So obviously, our hearts and thoughts and prayers go out to the families of the bereaved as well as all who were
Yes,
affected
it's
by it.
going to be a major rebuild, so we'll be watching closely. So for today, we are incredibly excited to have you on. You have been working in an area that is so timely, and that we're struggling to get some middle ground guidance on. So that's what I really wanted to talk about today.
Right.
So if you could you give us a little bit of, I always like to have guests give their own bio, because then you can pick where you really want to emphasize. Yours is tremendous. So if you could give us a little bit of, bring us up to speed, where you are today and how you got here.
Sure. Well, I'm the CEO of the Phi Beta Kappa Society. Phi Beta Kappa is America's first and premier honor society. It was founded on the cold winter night of December 5th, 1776, in Williamsburg, Virginia, by 5 undergraduates at the College of William and Mary. And they were determined to come up with an idea of something that really hadn't been done before, which is an honor society that was not based on class, that was not based on inheritance, it was not based on status, it was based on achievement. And so it was a notion of democratic egalitarianism, and meritocratic excellence, which is to say it's open to all, and those who achieve at the highest level are recognized. Now, to be honest, in 1776 in Williamsburg, Virginia, it wasn't really open to all, was it? So the Phi Beta Kappa story of the past 2 or 3 years is the American story. JJ, have I
Yes.
still got you? I thought
Yep.
we
No,
lost
it
the
seems we
signal there for a
lost it for a
second. We still
second.
got
Yep,
you.
but we're back.
Okay. Oh, good. So the truth is, we recognize our history and we celebrate what we've been able to achieve. Today, there are 290 chapters all over the country. There are big schools and small schools. There are East, Central, and West. There are public schools and private schools, faith-based schools, and non-sectarian schools. So they are truly a cross-section of the greatest schools in America. And the students who are recognized at those schools are the most accomplished liberal arts students. So that's one of the things I do. I'm also on the faculty at Georgetown University Law Center, where I teach a course in higher education, the law, as well as a course in criminal justice. And that relates back to some of my prior life. So just very briefly, before I was at Phi Beta Kappa, I was president of Brandeis University. Before that, I was the dean at the George Washington University Law School. And before that, I was on the faculty at Boston University School of Law. The block of time before that, I practiced law. I was an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York for 5 years, practiced in a mid-sized firm in Midtown Manhattan before that, and clerked for a remarkable federal judge named Amalia Kearse on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. My own experiences at Williams College in law.
We got you back. Comes in occasionally on your end, I think.
Okay.
That's all right. That's
Well,
live.
yeah, I'm not sure why that is, but okay, that's what it means to be doing work live. Exactly right.
It does. So you've been very busy. You've seen a cross section of.
I have indeed.
Yeah, and that's what really makes it exciting, right? Is your emphasis here is on promoting excellence and helping individuals across the spectrum of our country to excel. And yet, as you noted right in the beginning, there's still some challenges to that.
You bet.
And
you bet.
and so that which were the challenges in 1976, which I assume you're alluding to the fact that, first of all, I wouldn't have been allowed to be in that group, but
Well, that's correct, and goodness knows there were no people of color at that point. I'm proud to say that by the mid-late 1800s, we had men and women Phi Beta Kappa. We had white people and black people and brown people in Phi Beta Kappa. But the fact is, it is the American story. You know, the American promise was that we would be open to all, and over the past 2.5 centuries, we've expanded what all means.
we certainly have, and yet there's still an element of barrier to entry that can be problematic. In other words, access is not always enough. How are you seeing that play out, and how are you all trying to help close that gap?
Well, you know, Phi Beta Kappa, as I say, has an interesting vantage point because we say that the people we recognize are the most accomplished liberal arts scholars in the country. Now, if you're going to make that assertion, you know, so we're a narrow part of the funnel. You got to make sure the wide part of the funnel is as wide as possible. So you have to know that everybody could get into the system. So when you say we recognize the best, it was a race that everybody could run. I'll give you a good example of how it's working now. Trinity University here in Washington, D.C. There are a number of Trinities, one in Connecticut, one in Texas, but this is Trinity in Washington, D.C. Is a small school. They elected 13 members of Phi Beta Kappa the year before last, about the same number this year. And each year, about half of the students they elected to Phi Beta Kappa were dreamers.
Wow.
So that tells you that our position is not so much for any particular proposal on immigration law. That's really a little outside of our bandwidth, outside of our lane. But we do stand for recognizing the best students. And so we make the assertion that if you open the lens as wide as possible, you will recognize the best. And lo and behold, sometimes the best are people who are here undocumented. And goodness knows they come from every background, every class, every ethnicity. We have a large number of students who are the first in their family to go to college. So do I have a position on financial aid? Well, Phi Beta Kappa doesn't give financial aid. We don't, provide loans to students, but we do stand for the proposition that universities and colleges have an obligation to recruit from the best and the brightest, regardless of background. So I'll give you a good example of that. I spoke at the induction ceremony for Phi Beta Kappa at UC Davis a year ago. Among the students who was there was a young man who was pretty clearly first in his family to go to college, because his family was sitting right in the front row, and I could hear them talking before the event, and there was not a lot of talk to among do we
Yes, we
again?
believe.
No,
Yeah,
I
we're
think we're
back. We're
back
good.
now.
We can
Yeah.
follow.
Okay. Okay, good. So I said afterwards, I'd love to meet your family. He introduced me to his mother, who spoke not a word of English, his aunt, who spoke better English, and his high school teacher, who was there representing his background. She picked him out and said, this is someone we are betting on. The reason his father wasn't at the event is his father was a farm worker in Central Valley in California. His father was picking in the fields when his son was becoming Phi Beta Kappa in biochemistry at the University of California at Davis. So those stories are part of what we do
And
too.
that's such a tremendous story. That is the hallmark of our nation, right?
That's
That we
correct.
bring to bear or create the opportunity for all of these folks. I had the unique experience of being in Norway about a year and a half ago, and I was there on official business, so I was representing the United States. And I was sitting amongst people that looked like me and ironically had similar mannerisms to me, which I thought was very strange. And there was this moment where I thought, is this me? This is my biological heritage. And
Right.
I thought, and I was writing and I was sitting by candlelight and I thought, this is such a surreal moment. And I thought, no, this isn't me. I am part of this fabric of people that come from different places, even in our messiness, our chaos, our arguments. I love the fact that we're able to do what you just described, that this nation stands for that. And yet at the same time, I feel like there's a lot happening right now of discourse. And I know when we saw you and met you in Atlanta, this
Right.
was one of the hot topics, was this human rights discussion and the element of free speech, the allowance of it, but also the respect of that allowance. What is it that you're doing? And I know you talked a little bit about it in that conversation. How are you connecting to other professionals in this area, talking about this, especially on our college campuses?
So as we apply it today, we've done a whole range of programs across the country. At some campuses, we've done town hall meetings. In some campuses, we've done events that we broadcast out to the world. I'll tell you about one of those in a second. Some campuses have taught classes on this. Some have done meetings with faculty, with students, with staff. The whole essence of what we're trying to say is that we start with a presumption in favor of free expression. Now, that leads to some of the messiness, but in order to have a full, robust discussion, learning on a liberal arts campus, people have to be free to be able to express their ideas, to ask questions, to try out different ideas that they may not even be sure are right. If you're self-censoring, if you're not sure if you can ask a question, you'll never get to the right answer. So the starting position is one that is in favor of free speech. The limit on that is a fairly limitation, which is to say, if there is an intent to disrupt, if there is an intent to threaten with your language, that can be restricted or prohibited. But when I say threaten, I'm choosing my words carefully. If there's an intent to provoke, to challenge, to cause someone to rethink, not only is that not prohibited, that's what you're in college for. So there's going to be some tension here when people of different backgrounds by purpose are brought together. So I think that's where some of the discussion comes in an unhelpful way when people say, I don't wish to be hurt. Well, sometimes having your ideas challenged hurts. Nobody can threaten you. That's something different. The key piece here is that too often this is where the discussion ends, where the only question is, does somebody have a right to speak? And I think that leaves out one of the most important things that we don't talk about enough. There are many things you have a right to do that your educational institution ought to discourage you from doing. So I could begin to scream at you right now, and I have a right to do that. It would be totally out of context. You would not find it persuasive. You would find it, I'll use a word that my grandmother with her third grade education would have described it. She would have said it was rude, and she would have been right. And so we have an obligation as educators to inculcate values of these are better ways and less effective ways to communicate. Now let me go a little further than that. There are hurtful words that ought to be, in my view, constitutionally protected. But sometimes when those words are used on a campus, it is incumbent upon the leadership of the campus also to speak out and say, of course, that group has the right to say that, but what that group said is inconsistent with the values of this institution. Now, I can tell you from personal experience as a law school dean, as a university president, when you do that, there will be two contradictory things that will happen. On the one hand, people will say, well, is that all you did? No, that's not effective. All you did was make a speech. And on the other hand, people will say, I can't believe that you criticized my speech. You went too far. Well, the truth is, if some people think you're going too far this way, some people think you're going too far that way, you probably are more or less in the right spot.
That is decidedly a challenge, right? That almost no matter which direction you step, you get complaint.
Well, I think the answer to that, and when I do retreats for boards of trustees, I'm going to do one just in a couple of weeks coming up at one university, and I've done a number of these over the past years. One of the things I tell them right from the get-go is let's start by articulating what are the first principles of this institution. Because I can tell you right now, when one of these free speech challenges happens, whether it's a faculty member who writes or says something that's particularly challenging or provocative, whether it's an outside speaker, whether it's a student group, when one of these things happens and the media gets involved and the thing starts to swirl on you, right? If your way of making decisions is to put up your finger and to see which way the wind is blowing, I can tell you right now it's not going to be helpful because the wind is blowing just the way it's blowing in
Exactly.
Bermuda right now, which is to say hurricane force and at 360 degrees. And so if your way of making decisions is to see which way the wind is blowing, it isn't going to work. What you're going to have to do is say, I'm not going to make everybody happy here, but I know what my first principles are. And that's why the three principles that I articulate, number one is that there's a presumption in favor of free speech. Number two, you limit it only in cases of actual threats or intent to disrupt the entire operation. But number three, sometimes it is necessary for the institution to articulate its own values in the face of particularly problematic or hurtful or harmful speech, even speech that's protected.
How do we bring that to scale? How do we help generalize that and help the culture move towards that understanding?
Well, one of the reasons I like talking about this on the college campus context is that I think we have a chance on the college campus. And if we can get it right on the colleges, we can then move into the greater society. Because college, after all, has a reason for being, which is
Yes.
to educate. Society does not. Society has many reasons. People have to make a living. People have their lives to live. If the governor of the state were to say, my job is to be in charge of your moral education, I think people would find that cringeworthy or perhaps extremely problematic. But if your dean of students at the opening convocation said to you or to your children, one of my jobs is to think about your moral education over the next 4 years, I think most of us would find that touching. Some of the kids would find it over the top. I get that. But nobody would say that's crazy talk. Right? They would say that's one of the things we ought to be thinking about. So how can we encourage this kind of conversation on campus? I have a theory that I describe as advocating a vigorous civility. And the reason I call it vigorous civility, it's designed to sound a little like an oxymoron, but it's not. There is nothing about civility that is not rigorous and robust. People think civility means that we just talk about white clouds and doves and sing kumbaya. It's not. Civility are the rules of engagement for how we discuss. And at the same time, there is nothing that's not civil about vigorous discussion. Vigorous discussion doesn't mean I'm rude to you. It doesn't mean I insult you. it means that I challenge your ideas and you challenge mine right back. But we do it in a context of civility. So these are my 3 rules of vigorous civility. And I've said these on college campuses, and I urge campuses to take them up as rules of engagement. So number 1 is that we have to disagree with each other without delegitimizing each other. Disagreement and delegitimization are very different enterprises. Disagreement is, maybe paradoxically, is community building. See, if I disagree with you, that must mean that I've heard what you've said, and now I'm trying to explain to you what I think, and when I finish talking, I expect you to tell me what you think. So that act of disagreement is actually community building, because we're engaged in discussion and dialogue. If I delegitimize you, that's community destructive. Because then what I'm saying is you have no place at the table. Your ideas don't count. You don't matter. That is destructive of communities and is totally antithetical to not only what a liberal arts education is about. I would go further and say it is antithetical to what the American Democratic Republic experiment is about. So disagree without delegitimizing. The second, which is related but it's a little different, is that when we have these difficult conversations about topics that challenge people, that we at least begin by questioning each other's ideas, not each other's motivations. Now, it's very tempting if you skip right to the motivation. You say, I know why you're saying that. You're saying that because you used to work for so-and-so. Well, what that really is, that's a shorthand for saying I'm not going to deal with your ideas. I'm just going to go right after you, and I'm going to, so it's like delegitimization, but it's different. It says your motivations are illegitimate. I say begin with that because I'm not naive here. There are times when you should question people's motivations. There are people, particularly today, who watch what's going on campuses and then they weigh in by social media. Some of these people couldn't find the campus on a map, but they know how to weigh in. And some of these are sort of funny stories almost. Some of them are terribly tragic stories. I can tell you stories of people on my campus who were inundated with hundreds of thousands of threatening emails and texts, Instagram messages, where we had to shut down people's accounts because there's real harmful stuff coming at them. So when somebody behaves like that, I do question their motivation. They're not trying to discuss, but you don't start that way. The third rule of vigorous civility, which sounds like the simplest, but I'm going to tell you is actually the hardest, is that in a difficult conversation, we begin with a forced exercise of expressing our common ground. And by common ground, I do not mean at such a high level of abstraction that we haven't said anything. We all believe, that God is good and the devil is bad. Okay, well that doesn't make much progress, does it? I mean the real hard work of it. And so let me end this with giving you the best example I can give. It's a personal one. My academic work for many years before I became a dean was in the area of hate crime law, racially motivated violence. I still work in that area. I testified before Congress. I wrote a book about hate crime law in America, and it's an area still of deep interest to me. I regret to say it is far more relevant today than I wish it were. I wish to God that my field became obsolete, but it does not appear to be showing any signs of becoming obsolete. So for many years, I worked in this area. At the time my hate crimes book came out, and my position is that there is a good case, an important case, for having a higher penalty for hate crimes. There were many people who took a very different view, who felt that hate crime law, in fact, punished thought, not conduct, and therefore it's unconstitutional. I think they're wrong for reasons that I articulated at length. We can talk about that, this or another program if you're interested. But I debated these people on a number of different platforms. There was one point when one of my regular adversaries in this debate and I were each invited to give a talk at the Harvard Law School for a symposium sponsored by their Journal on Legislation. And we were both supposed to articulate our positions, and in fact it was a written symposium. We're each supposed to submit papers. Now frankly, JJ, by the time of this symposium, I'd really written what I wanted to say about the issue. And so had Susan, the person I was debating with. And frankly, at this point, we debated each other enough that I could have written her article and she could have written my article. So part of me thought, really, do we really have to do this again? And then something very important happened. I picked up the New York Times and I read a marvelous op-ed that was co-authored by a pro-life advocate and a pro-choice advocate. And they said, we fundamentally disagree on the core issue of abortion. One of us believes that life begins at conception. She believes that abortion is murder. One of us believes that life begins at birth. She believes that abortion is fundamentally about a woman's reproductive freedom and her right to choose how to use her body. We will not agree on that, and we do not intend to debate that in this op-ed. We wanted to see if we could put together 800 words on which we agreed. And they wrote a very powerful essay about adoption, about health education, particularly health education for young women from disadvantaged backgrounds, very powerful op-ed. So I called up Susan and I said, hey, did you see that piece in the Times? And she said, yeah, I saw it. I said, why don't we do that? Why don't we write an article on what we agree on? And I won't try to persuade you that bias crime should be punished at a higher level, even though I'm right. And you won't try to persuade me that it's a constitutional violation because you're wrong. And let's see what we can do. And we did, and we wrote what I will tell you is my favorite article of mine. Not that it got read the most or cited the most, but because it stretched me and forced me to stand inside her shoes, just as I was asking her to stand inside my shoes. And we began by saying, here are the things we agree on. And it turned out there actually was quite a bit that we agreed on. So those are my rules of vigorous.
I love it. And I did not anticipate making this statement, but what the method you just described is exactly the process I've been following for politics. I wanted to challenge myself to see how much disagreement is there actually. And I started with taking the platforms of the GOP and the Democrats and comparing them. And I found that they overlapped almost entirely, except for two key points. One dealing with who people should be allowed to marry, and one dealing with, of course, the pro-choice, pro-life discussion. And then I challenged myself to go through each issue, recognizing the devil is in the details. Can you find place in healthcare where there's agreement, but not be a fence sitter? Because the problem with fence sitting is, as I say in divorce, it's like divorce court where everyone loses. You know, who's going to get a sconce? You get the right one, you get the left one, nobody got a pair, everybody lost.
Everybody loses.
And so I think we have this struggle in politics where we try to get everybody to the middle, and in doing so end up having everybody a little unhappy or a lot unhappy. And I wanted to see, could we instead reduce the number of, pardon me, we have, welcome to filming outside.
I guess so.
This is real time. And when you, normally I try to make sure I'm in an indoor location. However, because we had to change our plans to evacuate, our options are rather limited. There are only a few locations here, so this is the best we could do. But so it happens.
Well, this is working. This is working fine.
It's how we get there. But anyway, so yeah, what I was trying to determine is, could I talk to both sides? Can I find a place where there's intentional agreement and knowledge and recognition, and reduce the number of differences such that you could get forward progress? Because I feel a lot like we've gotten to a stagnant place of extreme discussion.
I think that's right, and it's not even really discussion at that point. It's as a music professor of mine used to say, this is not dialogue. This is two contrapuntal monologues. This is people just talking past each other, and I think one of the reasons I talk about this on campus is that I feel that there is a real thirst for this kind of way of discussing, of way of debating, and there is a paucity of role models for it. They watch debates and they see food fights. They watch the news and they see food fights. And so instead of saying, this isn't right, we should be doing something different, they just say, the heck with all of it, and they're inclined to tune it off. So I find a lot of interest in saying, no, you're right. There is a different way of doing this. There is a way of disagreeing without delegitimizing. There is a way of challenging each other's ideas and not motives, and there is a way of searching for common ground. And that's not the same thing as saying if we just talk long enough, we're all going to agree. We're not all going to agree. There are fundamental things we disagree on, and that's okay. That's how God made us. But that's different from saying that we're going to tear society apart in the process of doing it, because that's not.
I often describe the current status of our nation. So an area in which I specialize, I call it strategic psychology, meaning at the national level, what is the overall emotional state of our country? And I like to say it feels like we're in a dissonant chord where things are off, the tension is high, the toxicity is there, everyone can feel it, but not everybody knows how to write the chord that resolves it. And so they're looking for it, but they don't know how to find it, and in their frustration, shut down, just as you described. So to kind of wrap up this conversation, tie a bow around it, thinking about the impact that you have with the individuals that you're leading and that we know will be our future thought leaders, what are the things that we can expect to see from them that will allow us to see what that resolved chord, metaphorically, of course, looks like? How do we get to that feeling?
Well, I think part of it is accepting that you won't get everything out of a discussion, and in fact, the other person is going to win a little bit too. And we have part of the discord you're talking about is this sense of, I would rather that both of us get nothing than that you get something. That, going back to your divorce court analogy, that is deeply dysfunctional. In a healthy relationship, certainly in a healthy marriage, but in any healthy relationship, each actually is as worried about the other's well-being as his or her own. And again, that's not saying, and therefore that means we always do it your way, because sometimes we will have fundamental disagreements. So I think the way we'll see this playing out is that people coming off of campuses will say not only that I want my particular political position to prevail, but hopefully people coming off campuses will say, and I want the political discussion to be a different kind of discussion. The truth is, we all know that ultimately the way in which we do our politics in this country will only change when it is disadvantageous to do it the way it's being done. And so when it becomes politically disadvantageous to behave in a certain way, people will stop behaving that way. And until it is, we can't expect that. How many times have you heard people, talk about attack politics? Everybody hates the attack politics. They want a higher level, but negative campaigning works. If negative campaigning ever stops working, then people will stop doing it. And that's not about the politicians, that's about it.
That's right. I will then end with a little bit of hope in that I've now traveled 29 states. I've driven about 10,000 miles, and I've been conducting interviews at every level, boots on the ground, everyday people walking around to experts such as yourself. And I'm starting to hear people say, I'm tired. I don't want that anymore. I'm going to look for something different. They can't articulate what they're looking for that's different, but they are finally starting to say, I demand it. So I hope that's heartening. And I hope that we start seeing, as you put, that it's demonstrated and that they start making different choices so that those ads do change. Thank you so very, very much for joining us today. This was wonderful. I absolutely enjoy speaking.
I'm so
yes,
glad.
Thank you. And we will talk soon again. Thanks so much.
I'll look forward to it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.